So in this video, we're going to talk about developing your research plan. So the first thing we have to figure out is, what is a research plan? A research plan will guide your research and tell you not only what to do next, but perhaps most importantly, when you've finished, so you know when you're done with your work. Because research is a recursive process where you ask questions, make observations, ask questions, make observations, and so on. And it could literally go on forever. In fact, it has literally gone on forever. By researching, you're entering into these conversations that have been going on for thousands of years. So, for your particular project, you need to know, when are you finished? So a research plan should account for, what do you want to know, what your method of delivery will be and who your audience is, what resources are available to you for answering your questions, how you will know when you've actually answered those questions, and what do you already know or have already observed about your questions and your topic. So, in order to develop a research plan, there's a really cool activity on page 54 in your Cengage book, and that activity will help you do an inventory of research. And so that's a really good first step in doing a research plan, is take inventory of what you already know and what resources are already available to you. Then you make sure you have a really clear research question like we talked about in the last video. And from there, you'll identify research methods or one method that would help you to answer that question. And so you lay out what resources you have, including time, and you assess what you have, and you lay out what you will do in steps. Now, I've already scaffolded this project a little bit for you by saying, okay, your abstract proposal is due here, your bibliography is due here, your outline is due here. So you already have some of these smaller steps in key points for you. And then you can fill in what you need to do to get each of those things done. So you'll want to make sure that you have clear goals that you can measure, that you know when you've achieved those goals. And you want to have points where you're going to reassess your project and say, okay, am I on track? Or do I need to make my plan a little bit different now? So even though you have a clear research plan from the beginning, that may not wind up being exactly how your research project progresses. So keep that in mind as you work, and be open to moving things around as you move along. A lot of times I get these questions of, well, this was my research topic, but I found this really interesting source and I want to pursue this. Is that okay? Of course that's okay, because that's how research works. It's a messy process, and you kind of just have to go where it takes you. So with that being said, what are some of the available research methods for this situation? In this situation, because of the nature of the course and how little time we have, honestly, the 10-week period is not very much time to do a full research project. There's a few research methods that I recommend that we use, and they're all going to involve analyzing composition in some way. So we don't have time to get IRB approval for research involving human subjects. We don't have time to set up an experiment of any kind. So we're going to have to dismiss a lot of available research methods simply because we just don't have the time or resources right now. So the methods that I recommend are discourse analysis, interview, case study, survey, or meta-analysis. There's a few other methods that are related to those that are also available options, but those are the ones I'm just going to recommend for now. Each of these is a systematic means of making, collecting, and analyzing your observations, and each of these is optimized for different kinds of questions. So when you develop your research question, you want to think very carefully about what kind of method is being implied by this question. So for instance, a survey gives us a really big picture look, and you can get a lot of responses in a very short time, especially with web optimized survey software. But it's very limited by what the researcher develops the questions on the survey to do, and it's also very limited by how briefly you interact with each participant and the anonymity of each participant. Um, so it gives you really big picture stuff, but it doesn't necessarily give you a lot of detail. Case studies are exactly the opposite, where you look at one person's situation, where Joan in our previous video might look at her own situation as a case study. And you get a whole lot of detail about it, but you have trouble generalizing that because you don't know if you're looking at something that's just kind of one situation or if this is representative of many situations. Things like case studies and interviews are very time consuming, but they do give you more individual feedback and more detail about individual situations. So the question is, are you looking for a high level of detail or are you looking for a big picture? Discourse analysis is somewhere in between, depending on how you conduct the discourse analysis. It can be very big picture or it can be very granular. Discourse analysis is looking at little d discourse, stretches of conversation or language that make sense. And you typically take things that are in a similar genre and you look for similarities and patterns with them. One way to do this is to code the material that you have by literally like highlighting every time you see the thing you're looking for. So maybe you're curious in Justin's project about hashtags. So he would literally gather a whole bunch of social media posts and he would analyze each of those according to certain variables. So he might analyze large categories of who the author is. Maybe if he's looking at specific demographics, he would categorize each author by age, race, gender, and other available information. And then, so he would kind of tag those that way in his own notes, and he would be able to count up, oh, I have 20 posts by people aged 18 to 25, and I have 30 posts by people who are aged 15 to 18 or something like that. And so you can actually start turning it into quantitative data by taking your qualitative data and getting measurable things out of it. So within the posts, he might look for every time he sees a particular hashtag, he can count up and he's like, well, out of those 20 posts, I have 2 instances of sorry, not sorry, or whatever. So discourse analysis requires some familiarity with what it is you're doing and or what it is you're looking at, and it requires a whole lot of planning because you're essentially surveying things that you collect rather than collecting surveys. And then the final option I have is meta-analysis, which is also really good for big picture work, but it requires a large body of knowledge on the subject already. It's sort of like a discourse analysis of published studies, but instead of in a discourse analysis where you're looking at how is the thing written and what conventions are being used, in a meta-analysis, you're looking at what are they saying and what are the patterns within what they're saying. So in sum, think very carefully about what you already know and observe, take an inventory of your knowledge, and then ask very specific questions and plan out when you're going to do each step that you have to do. And always be sure to put an end condition. Note when you finished your goal. Because if you don't know when you're done, it's very easy to get lost in research. It's a labyrinth, a rabbit hole, whatever, and you don't want to get lost in your research. All right, I'll see you later.